right, very good. So again, thanks everybody for attending today's session. Alex Tadischev will be speaking on our continued Snort 3 in Me series, specifically on Cisco Secure Firewall and even more explicitly, intrusion policy management and what's unique about Snort 3. Just a couple of reminders that we are recording the session. Secondarily, if you have questions that you'd like to have answered during the session, then please use the Q&A area. And then also you may note in the chat that if you've got questions that perhaps you want privately answered and not during this recorded session, then please feel free to send an email directly to me. That's Robert Albach, A-L-B-A-C-H-R Albach at cisco.com, which you can see in the chat. And with that, I'll turn it over to Alex. Alex?
Okay, thank you very much, Robert. So again, second iteration here, Snort 3 and Me. This is going to focus on the Cisco Secure Firewall threat defense, formerly called Firepower, intrusion policy management, and what's different or what it's like to manage a Snort 3 policy. And when we say policy, we're just talking about I'll talk about the intrusion policy, what we call the network analysis policy, which in Snort open source translates to just a config, right? So this all gets written out as one big fat little config on the device, but these are the GUI ways to configure that. So what we're going to go over today is what I call the Snort 3 newness. So I just have a few slides just to go over the high level, what to expect or what's changed. And then most of the presentation will be a demo of the new UI. So you're going to get basically the first public view of the new UI. I've done a few demos, but they've been for internal and partners and things like that. So it's kind of one of the first, if not the first time the public's going to see this UI. It's not that tremendous, but the software is going to release imminently any day now. So but my disclaimer here is this is pre-release code I'll be showing. So the UI, things could change slightly, but it's pretty late release. So I think it's going to be pretty close to what you're seeing here. All right. Let's talk about policy management, what we're talking about here. So release 7 is the upcoming release of the Secure Firewall, and that's where we added the Snort 3 capability. Now, that capability was already in what we call the FDM, or the on-box managed software, but with release 7, it's now being added to what we call the Firewall Management Center, FMC managed devices, and these are the ones we see most of our deployments, and especially for the larger deployments. In this release, the Snort engine will now be device selectable. So you can run Snort 2 or Snort 3 on your devices. So you don't have to run Snort 3, obviously. And if you just want to kick the tires, the first few months or weeks, that's perfectly understandable. You can switch those devices, one or two at a time, whatever you want to do. But you can mix and match Snort 2 and Snort 3 on your devices. When you upgrade, when you go from a previous version of the firewall to version 7, so 6 dot something, or probably to 7, it's going to maintain your previous Snort engine. Okay, so once you upgrade the FMC and start upgrading devices, we're not going to automatically upgrade your Snort engine to Snort 3. You'll then have that choice. So once you upgrade the devices to 7, you can decide if you want Snort 3 or not, but we're not going to automatically bump that up for you. If you do a fresh install on a device of version 7 and register that to a version 7 FMC, which of course you'd have to. You can't register a newer device with an older FMC. But if you do a fresh install, it's going to default to the Snort 3 engine. Of course, you can always change that. I'll show you how to do that. You can always change that back, but that's what the default would be. And the fresh install would probably be something for a virtual device. If you get one shipped from Cisco, if you buy a device, it's not going to come with Snort 3 or even version 7 yet. It'll come with probably a little bit, the other, probably a 6X version for right now. Okay, policy relationships. So we have a bunch of policies in the Secure Firewall if you're not familiar. And if you're not familiar, by the way, it's okay. I don't feel like you have to know everything about the Secure Firewall for this presentation. I'm not going to assume that you know a whole lot about it. It wouldn't help, or wouldn't hurt, I should say, to know something about it. And I'll talk about the differences a lot. But I'm going to do this in such a way that even if you haven't seen this before, you should be able to understand, hopefully, what's happening here. But the access control policy is kind of the central policy that would be kind of your firewall policy. and that's where we determine what will happen with the traffic, whether we inspect it, whether we let it pass, whether we block it. So that nothing's changed there for Snort 3. So if you use Snort 3, that'll look completely familiar. Network discovery is another policy on there. Nothing's changed. Malware file, nothing's changed. So those are not changed for Snort 3. Intrusion policy, however, has changed. So intrusion policy, we now will have two versions. There'll be a Snort 2 and a Snort 3 version. So those will share the policy name. We call this a unified policy, and it's unified in the respect that they share a policy name. So when you create an intrusion policy, say for your edge firewalls, for instance, it's still just called edge firewall. It has a base policy, and that's based on a rule set, either the connectivity rule set, the balance rule set, or the security rule set, or maybe the max detect rule set. So that's what we call the base or the base policy. And again, in open source, those are built into the rules too. You can read in the rule, there's keywords in the rule that tell you what, if you're using a tool like pulled pork or something like that, will tell you you can determine which rules are going to be enabled based on those security levels. That's actually in the Snort rule. So they share the name, the base, and the inspection mode, whether that's passive or inline. So that's one policy, but it comes in two versions, a Snort 2 and a Snort 3. Same thing for the network analysis policy. And again, in the secure firewall, there are two policies that control Snort 3 or Snort 2 for that matter, and that is the intrusion policy and the network analysis policy. Intrusion policy just controls what rules are enabled or disabled, what their state is, alert, block, disabled, pass in some cases in Snort 2. So intrusion policy controls the rule states. Network analysis policy controls everything else. So everything else in the Snort conf, everything else in the if it's a little file for Snort 3 is in the network analysis policy. So those are inspector settings for Snort 3, preprocessor settings for Snort 2. Of course, that is same in this version. That works the same way as the excuse me, intrusion policy with a kind of unified policy. So there's one policy name for the network analysis policy. And those two policies, Snort 2 and Snort 3, two versions, and they share the name, the base, and the inspection mode. So real similar between those two, but that's kind of how those are broken out. Again, it's all one big configuration file when we're all done, but in the UI, we split those up into two policies. And the device dictates the version of the intrusion and the NAP that are applied. So and what I mean by that is, again, you can mix and match these devices, right? So you can have mostly Snort 2 at this point. If you decide to upgrade a few devices to Snort 3, you can do that. What will happen is really nothing will change from your policy deployment perspective. Again, your network analysis policy, your access control policy is the same. So you don't have to think about that even. You just deploy it like you always would. The system will then deploy the appropriate version of the intrusion policy and NAP to the device. And here's what I mean. So we have here on the left a FMC or Firewall Management Center version 7. On the right, I just have three devices that it's managing. I have one that's version 7 running the Snort 2 engine, version 7 running the Snort 3 engine, and then one for an older version that has 661, which is a fine version. So we can do that. FMC can manage multiple device versions. So when you deploy your access control policy, let's say I deploy an access control policy and I deploy the same policy to all three of those because maybe they're at similar locations in the network, they're all on the edge or something like that. So I have the same rule set on those. So when you deploy, the system will then decide for you, okay, I'm going to deploy, and you can see at the top and the bottom devices there have Snort 2. So they're going to get the Snort 2 version of the policy. The middle one's Snort 3, it's going to get the Snort 3 version. So again, that's transparent under the hood. You don't have to think about that. Now, the reason I say this, though, is because what you do have to think about is that there are two versions of the policy, we call it, right? 2 and 3. They're really two policies, right? They're really separate policies. And if you're going to deploy something like this, where you're going to mix and match Snort 3 and use the same access control policy, my assumption would be that you want the same degree of protection on those three devices. So it's important then that those Snort 2 and Snort 3 policies are the same, right? Or at least as close as they can be. They can't be exactly the same because the rule set's not exactly the same. But as far as the level of protection, you can make those pretty much identical. And they will start out that way when you first upgrade a device. The Snort 2 rules will be migrated, or the states will be migrated up to Snort 3. But it's just important to note that don't let those diverge, right? If you're going to be using two of them, because if you're going to use them at the same places, you want them to get the same level of protection. So just be aware of that. All right. So again, Snort 3 intrusion policy, like I said, it's just the rule states, same as it was in Snort 2 for in our system. Um, so some of the things that have changed, again, if you're familiar with the current versions of the software, 6, 7, and previous. Um, so in Snort 3 policy, uh, what you'll have is the global threshold. We have SNMP alerting, and we have a sensitive data preprocessor, we call it there. Those are all removed. They're not there anymore. Syslog is another advanced setting you would call it that's in the intrusion policy in Snort 2. That's moved over to the access control policy in version 7. So that's kind of nice. All that syslog configuration is now a lot more centralized in the access control policy as before. Some of it was scattered around. So it really is, in Snort 3, it really is just rule states. In Snort 2, we kind of cheated a little bit. There's some advanced settings in there, which of course are still there in version 7 if you use the Snort 2 engine. But in Snort 3, it is simply just rule states in the intrusion policy. So it took out all this other stuff. Again, those rule states are migrated when you upgrade to 7. So what I mean is let's say, for instance, they're using a balanced base policy, which sets a certain number of rules enabled and set to drop in your rule set. If you're using that in Snort 2, when you upgrade, your upgraded policy is going to also use that same base, right? So it's going to start from the same rule set. In addition, any rules you have manually changed the state of in your Snort 2 policy, if there is a corresponding Snort rule, and for the vast majority there will be, those states are going to be the same in Snort 3. So it's going to basically take the rule states, the base policy, everything that's existing in Snort 2, and put that in the same version of the Snort 3 policy when it upgrades. Um, the Another change, suppression and thresholding, is something that's in the policy in Snort 2, and it still is in version 7 in Snort 2. In the Snort 3 policy, those settings are moved into objects, and I'll show you that when we get to the demo. There are no policy layers. So Snort 2 has this concept of policy layers. There's a built-in layer. You can add your own layers. There are no policy layers in Snort 3. You can still build hierarchical policies. So what I mean is you still base a policy on another policy. So you'll at least base a policy on one of the Talos-based policies, whether that's connectivity, balanced, security, or max detect, or there's actually one called no rules active. So you can base one on no rules at all if you want to. So you'll still have that, but you can also base a policy on another policy. So you can create your own base policy for your organization, right? And that base policy would have, I'm sorry, I'm getting a little complex here, so I don't want, just going to mention this because I could talk for hours on the hierarchy. I actually have a Cisco Live presentation on this too, but so you don't have to base every policy on a Talos policy. You can have your own, if you will, intermediate base, and you can still do that. So you can treat that kind of like layers. So you can make a change in one base policy and affect all your other policies. But again, I digress. I don't want to get too far down that rabbit hole. Just suffice to say, there's no layers in Snort 3. There are also new rule groups in Snort 3. So and I think you'll see, I think they're much easier to understand. Snort 2 has an awful lot of categories and groups and things where you can slice and dice rules, and sometimes that can get a little confusing, at least for me. This, I think, is a little more straightforward, and they work differently too. And here's what I mean by they work differently. You can customize your rule group security levels. So this is really cool, and I won't focus on it, but I'll make sure to get to it in the demo, and that is in Snort 2, your base policy, again, can be one of those connectivity, balance, whatever. So that's the base policy for your entire rule set. In Snort 3, you do that too, but you can also customize that for particular rule groups. And I'll show you what that means. But what it means is you can take a rule group and say, hey, I want this group of rules to be based on a different base policy, maybe on the security policy. So pretty interesting. So I'll show you what that looks like. The network analysis policy. So in Snort 2, it's a big GUI with a bunch of checkboxes, a bunch of preprocessors, and radios and fill in forms. It's basically a web UI form. In Snort 3, to JSON-based text configuration. I'll show you what that looks like. We're not migrating any of those customized network analysis policy settings from Snort 2 to Snort 3. There are just too many differences between preprocessors and inspectors to make a good conversion there between those two. So, and plus some of the reasons why you might have had customizations in Snort 2, they might go away for Snort 3 based on the way things behave and the way things function. So it was a better idea, we thought, just to start with a clean slate If you do have some specific inspector settings that you want to carry forward, you can do that manually. But honestly, it's going to be a small number of our customers that actually do make those customizations, and we feel like they know enough that or they'll learn enough about Snort 3 to make those themselves if you want to. But um, any network analysis policies that are existing previously in Snort 2, they will be copied to Snort 3. They'll use the same base, whatever the base was, connectivity, balancing, and security, whatever, but any customizations will not be carried forward over into that policy. Okay, enough death by PowerPoint. Let's go over to the FMC. That bigger, there we go. All right, so this is, now we're gonna see what the UI looks like here. Try to move this thing out of the way so I can actually get to the menu up there. All right. So here we are in the intrusion policy view. So this is on the FMC, this will be policies intrusion. So that's the screen I'm at here. So it looks different. So we still have, I had two policies when well, I have two policies here, right? So if I had two policies in the other, in a previous version, it would show the same way. But what I've got here is I've got one called the new balanced IPS and one called secure IPS, which I actually named upgraded as well. Just remind myself, this one was upgraded. And so this one existed previously, well, and it upgraded from 6.7. This is actually a new one, this new balanced one that I created. But you can see over on the right, we have two links or buttons here, a Snort 2 and a Snort 3. So one unified policy, right? But two different versions. So to edit those different versions, you'd click on one of those two links, which I'll get to in a bit. To edit again, there's a unified aspect here, and that is the name, the base, the mode, and that is this pencil over here. So there's basically three ways to edit this policy. You can edit this specific version, Snort 2, Snort 3, or you can edit the kind of the unified settings. So let's take a quick look at the unified settings. What I'm talking about here is, again, the name, description, the inspection mode, and the base policy. And again, as I mentioned, this base policy can be a Talos policy, which would be security, no rules, maximum detection, or connectivity, or balanced. Or I can base it on another policy. So I have this one here I created called new balance. So I could actually base this policy on my own policy, and I wouldn't do that in this case. But if I'd created a global policy, for instance, I could do that too. Okay, so before we leave the screen, a couple other things that have changed. Again, if you're familiar with the old UI, UI looks just about the same. We still have this we call the light UI here, which is our newest upgraded UI. The network analysis policy now, instead of having quick links up here where you had to kind of find the network analysis policy only from a couple screens, when you come to intrusion policy, network analysis policy is just a tab. This is a tab-based screen here. We're on the intrusion policy tab. Network analysis policy is its own tab. Kind of cool. We also have some sync status here. And like I said, when you first upgrade, it's going to take those rules and copy them over. Now, if you have custom rules, though, we're not going to migrate those automatically. There are ways to do that, which I don't really have time, unfortunately, to go into on this presentation. I can show you where they are in a bit, but I only have a few more minutes. I can't go into the whole thing. But if you don't have any custom rules and you've upgraded, you're going to get a green icon like the one up above here. It's going to say, yep, you're in sync, everything's cool. If you have custom rules, you're going to get an orange icon like the one below, because it's going to say, yeah, I migrated stuff over, but you had custom rules, so I couldn't do that. If you want to find out more about that, you can click on this. It'll open up a dialog here and give you some information about the migration, probably more than we need to go into today. But if you wanted to if you had made changes, for instance, to your Snort 3 rule states, you can also use this to resync your policy. So if I had just made some changes in the rule states, and again, not custom rules, but maybe I just changed some rules, enabled, disabled some rules in Snort 2, resync will move those, will copy those changes up to Snort 3 and resynchronize those policies. So that's another use case for that. All right. So let's jump real quickly over to the NAP, because I want to show you what that looks like. So I'm going to jump over to the network analysis policy tab. So I have two network analysis policies I've created, a balanced and a secure. Again, it looks real similar to the intrusion policy. There are two versions, Snort 2, Snort 3. There's the overview, again, the unified aspect. Snort 2 looks exactly the same, so I'm not going to go there. But if I look at the Snort 3 version, let's look at the balanced NAP Snort 3 version here. So when you click on this to edit, it's going to jump up this box. It says, hey, this is an advanced feature. It's, make sure you know what you're doing. And again, that hasn't changed in Snort 2 in that you can, if you damage or if you misconfigure the inspectors, you can negatively impact how the rules work. And it's the same way for Snort 2. If you misconfigure a preprocessor, maybe set the inspection depth too low, for instance, on HTTP inspect, you can hamstring your HTTP rules. So it's important that if you're going to make changes here, you know what you're changing, because you want to make sure you don't do something that inadvertently negatively impacts your detection. So if you're okay with that, click yes. So we're here so we can edit this thing. So this is what it looks like now. So these are all your inspectors on the left. And again, like I said, it's a JSON-based configuration. To see that, let's find one, the stream TCP, for instance. If you expand that, you can see the settings. So we have queue limits, max segments, policy, etc. So different settings in JSON format. So that's what the settings look like. Now, before I go too far into those, up above here we have actions. And one of those actions is view schema. So this schema will give you information on what is allowed in each one of these inspectors. And again, I'm not going to go into that, kind of introducing where it is, because I don't have time to go into it in this case. But if you have questions about how things are going to be configured or what the ranges are for different variables or values, the schema will tell you that. You also have options here for things like downloading the schema file, so you can look at it offline. Again, that's a JSON file as well. You can download a sample template of the configuration that you can then fill in. You can download the full configuration, which if you're going to be changing things, it might be good to have that configuration first, then if you're going to upload it. If you have overridden some of the configuration, you can download just the overridden configuration pieces. I'll show you that in a second. And you can also upload configurations. So you basically have a couple ways to edit this. You can edit it inline here, and I'll show you how to do that in just a second, or you can download the configuration, edit it, and then re-upload it. If you're going to make more changes, or if you just want to document what you're going to change by keep holding on to those configuration files. I just want to show you real quick, again, I don't have time to dive into everything here, what a change configuration might look like. So what I did here for HTTP inspect is I made a change here. So this is on the left, you can see is the balance, security, and connectivity inspector settings for HTTP inspect. And we have things like response depth, request depth. Those are kind of two of the main ones that are very important. And those do change, like for instance, in the security policy, those change a bit. Bunch of other things there. But what I did was I just changed the decompress SWF parameter here and change it from false to true. Over here on the left, let's see if I can find it. Here it is. It's false, and said no. I want shockwave files to be decompressed for whatever reason, and I changed that to true over here. The way I did that is I just edited it in line. So you can edit the inspector here, brings up the JSON config, and it's going to show me just my overridden configuration right here. Type your parameters in. It checks it, syntax checks, makes sure everything's cool. And then when you save it, then it overrides that whatever you have put in here from the default configuration you have on the left. And once you have that, you can see you get a little orange icon here that says, hey, you have an overridden inspector here. So again, if you're going to mess with this, dive into it, learn more about it, go to the help. But I can't do much more there because I'm trying to go as fast as I can. But those are the advanced inspector settings for Snort 3 and this new policy UI. So let's jump back over and look at intrusion policy. So this is one that more people are going to probably be interested in and actually make some changes in and see what's going on with this one. So I'm going to go to that new balanced IPS again, edit the Snort 3 version of the policy. Now, one thing you'll notice is it's loading a lot faster. If you've used this before with Snort 2, it takes a while for the FMC to pull those pieces in and build the whole policy. With Snort 3, it's much faster. And this is all real time. I mean, I'm not recording this. I'm clicking this as I'm going. So getting into this policy and just if you want to just look at a rule is much quicker than it was in Snort 2. All right, so here's the new UI. We've got the rule groups on the left. So let's start with let's just looking at the rule details and how to set state on a rule. So here's the rules on the right. So here's some custom rules, for instance, to take a look at the rule. You expand the little icon here. You can see the rule. It's a pretty simple rule in this case. To set the rule state, we can set the rule states here, block, alert, or disabled, or revert to whatever the default is in the base policy. Note that in Snort 3, if you're familiar, Snort 3 has block and drop keywords. Right now in this version, we're just supporting the block keyword, which is the same as the drop keyword was in Snort 2. So that's a difference. You'll see block instead of drop here. You can also add comments here. So if you want to comment a rule, you can do that. Okay, quick on searching. So if you want to search for rules, we have a search bar up here. So you can click in that search bar and it'll give you some ideas on what you can search on. So you can search on things like, well, it's a free text search, first of all, pretty much everything in the rule. So you can just type in a SID, or you can type in this case down here, you can see you can type in SID colon and then the SID number to get the SID. If it's a pretty unique SID, like a large SID from a newer rule, you can just type in the SID number up here. You don't have to put SID colon. You can just type, so something like 28496, see what I come up with. So I'm just looking for any rule with those numbers in it, and probably get at least the SID. So there's 28496. This rule happens to have the number in it somewhere, probably somewhere down in the detection portion. There's a, it's in there. But if you're lazy like me and you just don't want to type SID colon, you can just type the SID and realize you might get a couple false positives, but at least you'll get the one you're looking for. We also have some preset filters below there. So if you want to look for just the alert rules, the block rules, disable rules, if you click on these, it will poke that into the search above and you'll get those. Pretty straightforward. We also have advanced search. So advanced filters, and those let you look for things like, again, these are kind of holdovers from Snort 2. We put these in there in case you still want to use those. Microsoft vulnerabilities, which haven't been really updated since 2017. They stopped doing that, but you never know. I want to search for those. Classifications, so we can look for those. We can also look for LSP releases. So if you want to see, for instance, what new rules were released on a given LSP. So LSP is the new security package, as I talked about last time. If you saw the last iteration of Snort 3 and me, it's an SRU, a security rule update in Snort 2. In Snort 3, it's an SR or an LSP, which is a lightweight security package. Here I have the LSP release 2021/5/20, so May 20th. So I want to see just the new rules in that LSP. I can just click that LSP, unclick change, just show me the new rules. And now I can see these are the new rules in that release. So it's kind of cool. All right, let's talk about the rule groups. So this is, again, one of the key features, I think, of Snort 3. So different rule groups, but as you can see, they're pretty straightforward. If I open up the browser group, you can see we have one for WebKit, plugins, Firefox, other Chrome. So if I want to see all the rules in a particular group, I can click, for instance, on the Chrome rules, and it'll constrain the search. And you can see I'm just seeing the Chrome rules now. You can see there are 127 rules here. We're over that, 127. 64 blocked, 63 disabled, and that's based on this policy I'm using, which is balanced. Now, you'll also see by each one of these, there's a little bar graph thing, whatever you want to call it, and there's a security level. Now, I've actually already made a change to this one, but as you can see, most of these are security level 2, but Chrome has got 3 little bars enabled. So let me edit this. So what this lets you do, and this is what I was mentioning about the security levels per rule group. So each one of these bars corresponds to one of those base policies, right? So the left one is connectivity, next one over is balance, next one is it's a security policy, and the next one is a maximum detection policy, a huge rule set. So by default, all of the rule groups in this policy are going to have the same one the base has, which is balanced. And you can see the other ones on the left all have balanced. And this one would have had I not changed it already. But what this allows you to do is, instead of going, let's say I want some better protection on my Chrome rules. So I have a lot of Chrome and I want to just up the protection. I don't want to up the whole policy, the security policy. There's a lot of other rules come with that, but I want my Chrome inspection to be more aggressive, right? So what you can do, two ways to do it. One way, you can come in here and you can go down, search on the Chrome rules and go down and try to decide which Chrome rules do you want to enable. Oh, I like that one. What do I know? I guess that's okay. I mean, how bad is that? I don't know. Take a lot of research to understand exactly which ones are important. I can enable them all, I guess, but some of those might be quite old. A better way might be to say, let's just up the policy here. Let's use the security policy for the Chrome rule set. So what you can do then is, again, edit a security level. Starts out with the balance because that's what the policy has. You can say, let's make this more aggressive. Let's make it a security rule set. So let me just back out real quick. You can see there's 20 block rules now in the security rule set. I bet you already know how many there's going to be in the other one because I have that one selected. But if I go to the security rule set now and save that, so what it's going to do, again, it had 20 block rules before. It's going to say, all right, I'll up the security level there. Now there's 64 block rules. So they took the 64 block rules, which are enabled in the security rule set, and used that in this policy. So now you've customized the policy. What's nice about that is instead of having to go down and pick the rules myself, I'll let Talos do that for me. But if I had to pick the rules myself, what would happen is I'd end up with override. So if I pick a rule state, it's going to show as overridden here. So what that means is that rule state, because I overrode it, is going to be overridden now for now and forever. It's never going to change. It's always going to be an alert rule. But if I let Talos decide that for me, that means, well, next LSP that's released, if there's Chrome rules in it, I don't have to go back again and figure out which rules to enable. I want them always to be based on the security rule set. So as new rules are released, I'm going to get that more aggressive protection. And over time, as those rules need to be disabled because the threats are no longer present, I want them automatically disabled. I don't want to have to go in and tune this rule set anymore, manually go in and tweak things. So this is just a great way to tweak your rule set, increase your security levels, or maybe even reduce them, whatever you want to do, but not have to go in and keep redoing it and re-looking at rules and reevaluating all the time. Just let Talos make those decisions because that's what they get paid for. So I really like that. I think this can really help um, give people another knob really to turn to adjust your policy, go not having to go back and get into the weeds and get real um, specific. You can still do that, obviously. You can still go and make those individual changes if you want. The only thing is you really should be reevaluating those from time to time to make sure those rules still need to be there. So you still have that capability though. Ooh, what else do I have here? The only other thing I mentioned about the way this policy works as I'm changing things, the settings are being changed really on the fly. There's no commit button, right? So I can navigate away to the screen now, and those policy changes have been made. So if I go back to intrusion policy, go over to objects, wherever, there's no save button here. Things are being saved as we're moving here. All right. I know I'm a little bit over, but I'm going to go over to Robert told me I could. So I'm going to go over to talk about objects real quick. Another change here with Snort 3. So we'll go to objects intrusion rules. We have two tabs here now, Snort 2 and Snort 3. So Snort 2 looks the same. Snort 3 looks different. So Snort 3 looks real similar to the policy. Um, Now the rule groups in the policy are basically to say these are the rule groups that are included in this policy. And by the way, not all rule groups are included in all policies. In the security policy, there's actually a couple more rule groups in that policy that are not in the balanced policy. But this shows all the rule groups there are. So this is every rule group there is. There are actually some protocol rule groups, for instance, that are not in the balanced policy that are in the security policy or maybe in the max detect. But rule groups here are simply used for filtering. They're not used for, there's no security levels. You notice that there's no security levels on the groups here. They're just used for filtering the rules. You can search for rules here the same way. You can expand those and see the rules. So nothing's changed there. Why would you come here then? Well, a couple reasons. One reason to come here is I mentioned suppression and thresholds have moved out of the policy, right? So if you do need to threshold or suppress a rule, this is where you would do it. And that's over here on the alert configuration. So if I click, say I want to suppress or threshold this particular rule 46977, I can click the alert configuration link here. It'll give me a little dialog that says, hey, this is a suppression and thresholding. I'll click the little pencil, and you can configure suppressions and thresholds here. And nothing's changed here as far as how they work. The only thing that's changed now is the suppressions or thresholds that you set will follow this rule across every policy, rather than Snort 2. The suppressions and thresholds stay with the rule, but only while it's in the particular policy. So these are rule-based rather than policy-based. But as far as how they work the same way. Suppressed by source or by destination. You can threshold based on a limit, threshold, or both. And again, nothing's changed there. You can look at the documentation and how those work. I will mention the same thing as I mentioned in Snort 2. Really only do this for alert rules. Don't try to suppress or threshold drop rules. It didn't change in Snort 2 to Snort 3. Again, suppressions, all that suppresses is the output of the rule, the alerting. So the rule still does what it was supposed to do. So if it's a drop rule, it will still drop. It just won't alert anymore. So that's generally not a place you want to be. But you do want to set those alerts or a threshold of suppressions. That's here. Another thing you can actually do here is you can actually change the rule state in your policies from here. Again, be real careful with this because now we're tweaking each rule specific to the policy. But if I needed to, for instance, change this rule across all policies, right now it's set on a per intrusion policy basis. So it means some policies may have it enabled, some policies may not. But if I want to make sure it's one way or the other on all my policies, I can click here and it'll show me what the setting is here. So it shows me the setting in the policies where it's enabled, shows me the setting in all the policies, whether it's the Talos policy or my own. To edit those, I can click this, and then I can say, okay, I want this to be on a per intrusion policy basis. Right now, it's only set in the security policy, but if I add my other policy, which is the balance policy, I can tweak that and say set it to block in this policy, alert in that policy, or I can set it the same in all policies. So I can say, I want this to be alert in all policies. Again, be careful with this because you're making a specific change to all your policies at the same time. So again, if you're going to be making these specific changes, it really it's important that you go back and review these. So again, I would recommend using those rule group settings for the most part if I most often, and use this less often, but it is here if you need to do it. Whew. Um, that's pretty fast. I had to talk fast and I still went over. That is, again, a quick, fairly high level run through of the changes and how to edit policies in Snort 3 in the Secure Firewall Release 7, which will be out again any day now. So with that, I'm going to take a drink of water and give it back to you, Robert. You want me to talk about anything else or skip anything?
Do I want you to skip anything?
No, it's too late to skip anything, right?
Yeah, too late to skip anything. No, well done. So just going to, most of the questions have been answered already. Actually, I've seen a very good question here. What about rule recommendations? Will that be
Okay.
available with Snort 3? So the answer is yes, it will, but when will it be available with Snort 3? Because it's not shipping now, and that will be in 7.1 at the end of the year, with all hopes moving forward. So good question there.
Yeah, we're working on
Um,
that. So it's going to be, I'm looking for some good, we're going to make some good updates to that rule recommendations. So yeah, it should be in the next release.
Excellent. And no other questions right now. So Alex, great job again, as always. And everybody, thank you for attending. Thinking the next session, if you folks have thoughts on what you'd like to see in the next session, maybe more policy stuff, but we're generally planning to jump into this Snort rule language itself for Snort 3. But again, send us a note. Let us know what it is that you'd like to see. Deeper dives on policy, jumping into Snort rule writing. Let us know and we will respond accordingly. So with that, thanks again, everybody, and have yourself a great week. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.